I'm a freelance programmer. Except for client meetings and business trips, I'm usually at home. Because of this, I spend a lot of time with my wife. My wife is also a housewife, so we are at home a lot. We were an indoor couple. We were married for 3 years at the time. My wife was 31 and I was 35. We met through a college club. In the morning, I woke up first and made breakfast. Then I would wake up my wife and we would eat together before starting work. My wife would clean up breakfast, do the laundry, clean the house, and then she would cook lunch for us. Sometimes we would go out for lunch for a change of pace, just the two of us. Basically, it was just the two of us the whole time. My wife didn't seem to mind. Sometimes, when I was too busy to eat lunch, she really missed me. It was a small thing, but we loved our happy life. But gradually, that life changed. My wife began to frequently go out at night. After she cooked dinner for us and we ate it together, she would say, "Well, I'm off," and leave the house. After returning home at dawn, she would stay in bed until close to dusk. I cooked breakfast and lunch and eat by myself most of the time. At first, it was not too often. It was about once a month, so I thought it was just an occasional relaxation and was happy to send her off. But the number of nights out kept increasing, and eventually it became almost every day. When I asked her where in the world she was going, she would be vague. At the time, we had only been married for 2 years. I was still feeling like a newlywed. My wife was not in that mood. Eventually, there were more and more days where she didn't even cook dinner. I was living alone most of the time. When my wife would go out, she would wear a lot of makeup and flashy clothes. I had never seen her dress so stylishly when she went out with me. One day, I started to think something was wrong. I looked in the kitchen garbage can to throw out the trash. I found a carelessly discarded receipt. Normally, I wouldn't pay attention to them, but that day something caught my attention, so I opened it up and took a look. It was a receipt for a karaoke bar for 1 male and 1 female. I kept a record in my notebook where I not only kept track of the day's work progress, but also what I ate, when my wife went out, what she said, and things like that, and it proved to be useful in this situation. I checked the dates on the receipts. It was the day my wife went out for a night out. According to the record of that day, my wife had gone out with 4 of her friends from school for a girls' night out, so the receipt should actually read 5 women if my wife was telling the truth. But the actual number on the receipt is 2, 1 male and 1 female. Is it possible to get the gender wrong? But it is unlikely to get the number of people wrong. I knew it was strange. I had my doubts, so I kept the receipt just in case. A few days later, I received a call from a friend. Apparently, he saw someone who looked like my wife enter a hotel downtown with a man. "I only caught a glimpse of her, so I could be mistaken. You said the other day that your wife goes out a lot, so I was just curious." I thanked him and hung up. The receipt thing had also made me more suspicious. I was curious, but there was no way I could ask my wife directly. I decided to investigate on my own. "Eric said he saw you the other day. He said he saw you downtown." My wife became weary. She didn't answer me and somehow deflected the conversation. "Where downtown? When?" She didn't even ask me these questions. Normally, you'd be curious about that. I wasn't sure, but just in case. She was really cheating on me. I didn't say anything about the receipt either. And then we ended the conversation right there. However, since that day, my wife always made an excuse to go out, whether it was a girls' night out or a drinking party. I knew something was obviously wrong, but she never took any action that could be used as evidence. I thought about hiring a professional to investigate, but my wife is spending most of our income. It's quite shameful, but I didn't have much money at my disposal. I kept worrying about what to do, and before I knew it, 6 months had passed. Then the wind started blowing in a different direction. I received an offer for a one-time job. It was an express job, the pay was good for the job, and it was a bit of extra income. I've had this kind of thing happen before, and usually I tell my wife honestly and give her all my income. But this time I decided to hide the extra income. It's not enough to hire a private investigator, but maybe I can get something out of this. I tried my best to wrap my head around it and came up with a plan. First, I would hand over half of my extra income to my wife. And then I told my wife, "I've got to go on a business trip for the next couple of days. You'd be bored at home, so you should go on a trip." My wife didn't even question what I said or did. "Yay, you're so thoughtful sometimes," she said, and then she quickly put away the money she had received. Of course, this was part of my plan. I couldn't afford to use a private investigator. I would have to get the evidence myself. If I go on a business trip, my wife doesn't have to try to hide anything. Furthermore, if she goes on a trip, of course she would invite her lover. The plan was to follow them. However, on the day before the mission was to be carried out, something happened where I didn't even need to follow her. My wife was excited, and she was packing her luggage into a large carry-on case, but on the way, she said she needed something and went out to shop. I decided to check the contents of the carry-on case. I was just checking to be sure, but I found some crazy stuff in the carry-on case. Birth control pills and so-called adult toys made up about half of the luggage. In addition, a luxury brand necktie was also found. There was also a message card enclosed that said, "I love you, Stephen." My wife, a housewife, does not have enough money to buy such things. Obviously, she bought it with my money. What is she doing with my money? I was disgusted. Paying for the trip was part of my plan, but I didn't tell her she could spend money on gifts. I was so disgusted that I quickly changed my plan and I called my in-laws and my parents. "We need to talk. Would you like to have dinner at our house today?" To the surprise of both parents, they agreed to come. My wife, who had said she would be home in the evening, hadn't come home yet. I can't cook that elaborate a meal. I ordered sushi from a delivery service and prepared to welcome my parents. And so, later than planned, by the time my wife came home, everyone was at our house. Both my parents and my parents-in-law were all fidgeting, wondering what the conversation was going to be about. They probably thought it was a pregnancy report. I'm sorry to think about it now, but I needed their cooperation to create a situation where my wife could not run away. When my wife came home, she was also stunned by the sudden turn of events. "We haven't had dinner together as a family, so I thought we can all eat today," is what I said. My wife agreed. The dinner proceeded peacefully for the time being, but my wife looked a little dissatisfied and glanced at me. Of course she would. I know she wants to be in good shape for the lovey-dovey trip with her lover, but that's not going to happen. I told my wife, "Don't look so uninterested just because you're excited for your trip tomorrow. You can have fun starting tomorrow. I've got a tough business trip starting too." My wife stared at me as if she was even more miffed. Then, she seemed to sense the tense atmosphere. My parents and in-laws came over and said, "A trip? That's nice. Where are you going? Who are you going with?" they asked. My wife said, "I'm going to San Diego with my best friend." She flatly lies. Well, there's no way she can say, "I'm having an affair with my lover." I had no choice but to expose her myself. I got up from my seat and went to my wife's room to get the carry-on case. After making sure the items were still inside, I went back to the living room. As soon as I entered the room, I pretended to trip and stumble. The contents of the suitcase came flying out. Birth control pills, adult toys, gifts, and cards for my wife's lover. My wife's screams echoed through the living room. "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm a little wobbly." "Wait, what is this?" I asked calmly, pretending to know nothing. My parents must have realized something. The air was instantly frozen. They all stared at me with cold eyes. My wife was in a complete panic. "Oh no, oh no, oh no," she said. Of course, there's no way to cover it up. If the evidence is revealed to this extent, I went to my wife and confronted her. My in-laws were furious, and she couldn't escape. My wife finally started crying and got down on her knees. My parents were awkwardly silent. My mother-in-law was completely pissed off. She kicked my wife on her knees, grabbed her by the hair and slapped her. My wife cried even more. The dinner party was transformed into a war zone. "What the hell is this? Does this mean you were cheating on your husband?" When she was questioned, my wife cried and admitted that she had cheated on me. "I was lonely because you didn't care about me. I missed you. Forgive me. I won't do it again." That excuse pissed me off. I was at home all the time. I tried to be with you as much as possible. You were the one who wasn't home. When I said that, it sounded like she knew that, and she cried even louder. All the love I had for my wife had disappeared, and I felt no emotion. I told my wife that I was divorcing her and that I was going to ask for alimony. She went back to sobbing and trying to get through to me. My in-laws agreed with me, and then, on behalf of my wife who couldn't pay, they offered to pay the alimony in a lump sum. I gratefully accepted the offer. I wanted my wife to pay by herself, but then I wouldn't be able to cut her out of my life. I just wanted to get rid of my wife as soon as possible and forget about her. Now that we've talked it over, I packed up my wife's belongings at home and packed them into my in-laws' car, and they took her home. Only my parents and I remained in the house. I told my parents everything that had happened. I told them everything, including this trap. "You've been through a lot," my father consoled me. My mother said, "Do as you please. If you have any problems, call us immediately this time. Also, come and visit us once in a while," she instructed me. I thanked my parents for their kindness and sent them off. After that, it was quick. I didn't want anything more to do with my wife, so I asked a lawyer to help me. I asked my lawyer to demand alimony from my wife. Once I stopped giving money to my wife, I had enough money in my pocket to hire a lawyer right away. I was stunned at how much money she had been spending. I felt ashamed of my own naivety. The lawyer got information from my wife about the other man. At first, my wife was reluctant to talk, but when I told her that I would charge her for the two of them if she did not tell me, she readily confessed. He was single and met my wife on a dating app. Now that I knew his identity, I also demanded alimony from the other man. He was working part-time and had little money, but he collected designer items that my wife had been gifting him. So he sold them to pay the alimony. The wife's alimony was really paid for by her parents. It was a bit painful because it was several $1,000s, but they told me, "Don't worry, we'll make sure she pays us back." I was honestly grateful to them. After everything was over, I filed for divorce. By the way, my wife has been working as a live-in worker at a factory since then. She has been using most of her income to repay her parents. After the divorce, my wife thought she could live with her lover, but after everything had settled, he moved away. Well, if you think about it calmly, it's not surprising. My wife thought he was in love with her, but it wasn't true, which made her depressed. Her head was up in the clouds. As for me, on the other hand, I am back to being single, but in the end, my wife was not at home most of the time, and I was living like a single person all along, so I don't feel lonely at all. In fact, my expenses were lowered and I could afford to live more comfortably. I made a fresh start and moved out. This time, I made a proper workroom. I made a very comfortable office space where I am very particular about my chair and desk. After I found out about my wife's affair, my emotions were heightened, but I have calmed down. I can now spend my time in a very peaceful way. I can spend all my money for myself now. I think I will take my parents on a cruise next time. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed the show. We look forward to seeing you again. Please subscribe to our channel as well.